"What do you have left to give, Dad?" Stephen said. "I think it's time we were blunt. You're here out of pity, not because you're useful anymore." I didn't react. I didn't argue. I just nodded. In my years as a railroad accident investigator, I'd seen derailed locomotives, cracked rails, and gears worn so thin that disaster was an inevitability. Accidents are never random. They are the result of ignored signs. I had ignored so many signs in my own family. Until my 72nd birthday. They had summoned me to the house for 7:00 p.m. Danica, my daughter-in-law, sent a brief text. "Come a little early, Dad." Just a simple dinner. I still have that text message the way you keep the first incident report before filing the official one. I arrived on time. My shirt was pressed, my hair was combed, and a homemade apple tart was tucked inside a paper bag. When Danica opened the door, she didn't look at me. Her eyes were glued to her phone. "Oh, you're here," she said, then turned and walked away. No hug, no eye contact. Just a cold procedure. Emily, my granddaughter, was curled up on the sofa, headphones on. I gave a nod in her direction. She didn't look up. Stephen emerged from his home office in a white button-down phone in hand. "Hey, Dad," he said, brushing a kiss against my cheek that was as substantial as air. "How are you holding up?" "I'm still breathing," I replied. My tone wasn't a joke, nor was it an accusation. It was a statement of fact. We sat at the dinner table. The meal was a sprout salad, brown bread, and celery juice. I chewed slowly, making no comment. A man who has overseen 42 railway investigations doesn't lose his temper over a bad meal. Afterward, Stephen handed me a gift box wrapped in silver foil with a pale blue bow. "We all picked it out for you," he said with a smile. Danica's lips tightened into a smirk. Emily glanced over, saying nothing. I opened the box. Inside was a passbook savings account, a light gray one. It was empty. No account number, no balance, no beneficiary's name. There was just a small slip of paper tucked inside. In Stephen's handwriting it read, "What you have to leave us is as empty as this book." Danica let out a sharp laugh. Emily snorted. Stephen clapped me on the shoulder. "It's just a joke, Dad. Don't take everything so seriously." I looked at the passbook. Then I looked at their faces. No one noticed that I was recording every detail. Not with a camera, but with the skills I once used to reconstruct accident scenes, the lighting, the seating positions, the vocal tones, the exact time. And then I saw something odd. Emily, my granddaughter, had her hand under the table. A faint blue light emanated from her sleeve. I recognized it as the glow of a phone's camera. It was recording. She looked at me. No words, no smile. That look, it wasn't the look of a child laughing along with the adults. I placed the passbook back in the box and nodded. "An interesting gift," I said. Then I picked up my fork and finished the last bite of my salad. 3 days after the birthday dinner, I got a call from Stephen. "Dad, can you stop by tomorrow afternoon? There are a few papers to sign. The bank needs to verify some old files." I said, "Sure," immediately without asking any further questions. He sounded busy but was making an effort to be polite. I could hear it clearly. I'd trained enough young engineers to distinguish between real pressure and the kind men feign to shrug off their duties. After hanging up, I took out a notebook. Old professional habits die hard. I wrote, why the need to sign? Which assets are being verified? Why mention the bank right after the empty passbook incident? Then I opened my old file cabinet. The house I live in, small as it is fully in my name. My retirement account is split 3 ways: an investment fund, a fixed interest account, and a cash savings account at the bank. I went through every page, checking every stamp, every recent update. Nothing had changed, but I knew that any forgery begins the moment the owner lets their guard down. That evening, I called Henry Lewis, a former colleague who used to work at the state's financial records office. We'd once investigated a mortgage fraud case together that cost an old engineer his entire home. I didn't go into detail. I just asked, if a relative tries to take out a loan using an elderly person's name, is there a way to detect it? Henry chuckled softly over the phone. There is, if the old man is still sharp enough to ask questions. I hung up. Nothing more needed to be said. The next morning, I brought a pen with a mini camera embedded in the top, the kind I used to use when investigating machine rooms suspected of falsifying maintenance logs. I clipped it to my jacket, aimed straight ahead. I checked the battery and memory, recorded a few test sentences, then turned it off. I wasn't visiting my son. I was conducting an investigation. When I arrived, Danica opened the door. This time her smile was a little too wide. Dad, you're here. How are you? I just nodded. Stephen was at the dining table with papers spread out. A steaming cup of coffee was already waiting for me. This is just to adjust the co-ownership on the old Cleveland apartment, he said. It was in your and Mom's name. We just need to sign to remove her name to match the new property deeds. I sat down, but didn't touch the pen. Why is this necessary now? I asked. Stephen hesitated. Oh, the bank requested it. Just a formality. I nodded, but my eyes were fixed on the bottom of the document. There was a small section that read, Consent to the change of the authorized party for the management of the estate and all related financial transactions. I asked, what does this section mean? Danica interjected, her voice still light. Don't worry about that, Dad. It's just standard boilerplate. It doesn't affect anything. I picked up the paper, put on my reading glasses, and examined the fine print below. The font was smaller than usual, but it was clearly a legally binding clause. I didn't sign. I put the pen down and looked Stephen straight in the eye. If you want my signature, print a new version without the power of attorney clause. Otherwise, we're done here. Danica's lips tightened. Stephen was silent for 3 seconds. Then he said, All right. We can do it another time. I nodded. I was used to the way people feigned civility when their trap failed to spring. As I stood to leave, Emily walked past. She looked at me and her gaze was different. There was no fear, no coldness, just a quiet acknowledgement from someone who knew they were witnessing something wrong. I nodded to her. No one else saw me to the door. Back home, I took off my jacket, removed the device, and connected it to my laptop. The recording was crystal clear down to the sound of a finger tapping on the table. Danica's voice. Don't worry about that, Dad. It's just standard boilerplate. My short refusal. And the silence that followed my refusal to sign. It was a silence I knew well. In an investigation, the person who needs time to think after a direct refusal is usually the one with something to hide. I saved the file, naming it Signing Request, Refusal, 3M12s. I created a new folder and named it Case Blake Family, Phase 1. I knew what was coming. I just had to let them think I didn't. They didn't realize I was suspicious. The truth is, I once solved a derailment in Iowa from a single blurry video shot by a passenger. Everyone thought the crash was caused by rain, but I saw something else. Track number 4 was misaligned by 0.7 degrees right before the curve. Betrayal in a family is like that. It never arrives suddenly. It reveals itself in the small things: a contract with faded fine print, a gaze that won't meet yours, or a cup of coffee poured for you. Before anyone asks, "What would you like, Dad?" I began my preparations. First, a micro camera disguised as a coat hook purchased from a website frequented by engineering techs. I chose a model that didn't transmit a signal. It saved directly to a memory card. The battery lasted 3 hours, enough to record a family dinner. Next, a ballpoint pen with a built-in audio recorder placed in my shirt pocket. I'd use this type to record witness statements during accident assessments. People tend to speak more freely when they think it's just a pen. I practiced my voice. A little hoarse, a little resigned, as if I were truly beginning to weaken. On Saturday afternoon, I called Stephen. I've been thinking. Maybe I overreacted the other day. If you print out the papers again, I'm willing to take another look. Stephen couldn't hide the relief in his voice. That's great, Dad. I'll get them ready. How about Danica makes us something light? Don't worry about a thing. I hung up without another word. That evening, I polished the pocket watch that had belonged to Silas, the only friend in the industry I ever fully trusted. I used to joke with him, if I ever get conned, the culprit will probably leave his footprints on my own floor tiles. Silas was gone, but my instincts remained. And this time, I was the one leaving a trail that was being meticulously documented from the start. I arrived at their house at 6:50 p.m., shirt buttoned to the top. The camera on my chest was on. The pen was recording. I placed my keys on the table in a spot with a clear line of sight from my dinner chair. Danica greeted me with a smile. Stephen invited me to sit as if all was forgiven. The meal was steamed broccoli oatcakes and kale salad. I didn't eat much, but I offered a few nods of approval. When we finished, Stephen placed the documents on the table again. We took out the power of attorney part just like you wanted. I pretended I didn't have my glasses. Could you read it to me, son? It'll be quicker. Stephen read. His voice was steady and clear. When he got to the part about approving the updated account information, I asked, "What does that sentence mean?" Danica answered quickly. "It's just to confirm that Stephen is helping you with the paperwork. It doesn't affect your ownership at all." I was silent. Then I said, "So who is the named owner on my retirement account?" No one answered right away. Stephen took a quick sip of water. Danica frowned. "Are you accusing us of something, Dad?" I gave a small smile. "No. I just want to be sure. I once knew a man who almost lost his house because he signed a paper without reading it." Stephen sighed. "Dad, we're not strangers." That was the line. I'd heard victims say the exact same thing when explaining why they hadn't checked the documents. He's my son. He would never do that. I put the papers in my coat pocket. Let me take this home and read it over. Danica forced a smile. Whatever you want, Dad. I left at 8:10 p.m. Back home, I removed the devices and transferred the files to an external hard drive. Then I played them back, every word they said, complete and clear. No one mentioned my retirement funds. No one affirmed I was still the sole owner. No one stopped me from nearly signing an invalid document. I saved the file as dinner, the bait, audio plus video. Then I opened my file cabinet and took out a document box. On the lid, I wrote Edmund Blake, the final investigation. Not for an accident, but for a deliberate forgetting. On Monday morning, I went to the bank branch where I had opened my retirement account in 1997. The teller smiled at me. "Mr. Blake, I believe the last time you were in was last year." I nodded. "I'd like a printed statement of all transactions from January until now, for both accounts, savings and retirement." She checked her system. "We'll need your ID and a signature verification, sir." I provided them. She took a few minutes to process it, then nodded. "We'll print that for you right away." I waited, silently, without impatience. In an investigation, silence is a survival skill. The statement was handed to me. I opened it page by page. February, a withdrawal of $3,000 noted as investment in household bonds. March, a payment of $480 for a financial advisory service fee. April, a withdrawal of $12,000 transferred to an account under the name S. Blake. I stopped. That line was marked with an internal transaction code, disbursement to authorized dependent. I had never authorized anyone. I had no reason to withdraw $12,000 in April. And S. Blake could only be Stephen. I closed the folder. Could you show me the most recent authorization form on file? I'm afraid there's been a mistake. The young woman frowned. Of course, sir. Let me get my manager. 10 minutes later, a man in a blue tie approached. Mr. Blake, according to our system, an updated authorization form was filed this past January. It grants withdrawal and transaction rights for amounts under $20,000 to a secondary party. Stephen Blake, relationship son. I spoke softly. I don't recall signing such a form. He paused. Let me print a copy of the form and the signature on file. I took the printout. The signature, it was close, but it wasn't mine. It was a forgery from memory, good enough to fool a stranger, but not the man who had signed his name thousands of times. I had spent 20 years verifying forged signatures on railway maintenance logs, and I could state with certainty this was a forgery. I left the bank without raising my voice or making a threat. I only asked one question before I left, I have a color copy of this document, along with a receipt showing the date it was updated in your system. Of course, sir. It may take a day to process. That's fine, I said. I've already waited 4 months without knowing. That night, I opened a new Word document. The first line I typed was, Case File Number 4, Transaction, April 12th. Forged authorization, beneficiary Stephen Blake. I pasted a scanned image of the printout circling the incorrect angle in the signature and comparing it to documents I had signed 5 years prior. The final stroke was off. Instead of curving to the left, it angled straight down. I once solved an accident from a 1.2 millimeter crack in a bolt. A single incorrect pen stroke was not going to get past me. I saved the file. The password was Week 14 Crossbeam Fault, a code only I would understand from the 2004 bridge collapse I led the investigation on. The next morning, I received an email from the bank, the full-color copy. It included the date the authorization was signed and updated January 12th. On that day, I was at the hospital for an eye exam. I still had the insurance receipt with the exact date and time. It was impossible for me to have been in 2 places at once. I printed everything. Then I replayed the audio from the dinner, fast-forwarding to the part where I asked, who is the named owner on my retirement account? The silence that followed that question was now louder than ever. That silence, it was evidence. I had enough clues to reconstruct the scene. And this time, the one who was about to derail wasn't me. I called Stephen on Wednesday. My voice was the same as always, tired with a hint of hesitation. I've been having second thoughts about those papers. Maybe I'm being too suspicious, but could you two print another copy? This time we'll just do it by the book. I'll sign it and be done with it so I can stop thinking about it. Stephen answered immediately. No hesitation. Of course, Dad. That's great that you've changed your mind. I'll get it printed. Can you come by this Friday? I agreed. But first, I prepared. I printed the bank evidence, the receipt from my eye exam on January 12th, the signature comparison, and the system update confirmation. I placed everything in a yellow manila envelope, sealed it, and put it in the old leather briefcase I used to take to crash sites. I put on the chest camera again, checked the recording pen, and this time I added a smaller device. A microphone disguised as a shirt button connected via Bluetooth to my phone, where a recording app was running silently in the background. I used to teach young technicians, always have 3 recordings. One they know about, one you know about, and one to cross-reference if everything goes wrong. I arrived at the house at 6:55 p.m. on Friday. The atmosphere was unusually quiet. Danica wasn't there. Emily was upstairs. It was just Stephen. Danika's at yoga and Emily's studying, he said. I thought we could talk privately. Perfect. Exactly what I wanted. I sat down. Stephen presented the new document. I glanced over it. This time, the power of attorney section was gone. I feigned a tremor in my hand. You know, my mind isn't as sharp as it used to be. Sometimes I can't remember what I've signed. Do you think I might have signed something without realizing it? Stephen hesitated for a second. Just 1 second. Then he said, Dad, sometimes we have to handle things for you because you forget so much. It's not because we want to take anything. It's just to make things easier to manage. I said nothing. I let him continue. Back in January, we filed some paperwork to simplify your retirement accounts. We didn't touch the money. It was just for convenience. We really didn't mean any harm. It was a confession. Not enough for a legal conviction, but more than enough for a moral counterstrike. I nodded. I understand. I placed the pen on the table. Could you hold this for me? My hand is shaking a bit. Stephen took it, nodded, and offered a small smile. I added, as if trying to justify myself, You probably think I don't remember anything. That's okay. I used to think I'd forget things too. But then I remember back when I was working, they said I was the only one who could spot a hairline crack under a coat of paint. Stephen chuckled. Because you were good at your job. I replied, no, because I knew where to shine the light. And this time, I shined it in the right place. The air grew heavy. I saw the slight clench in his jaw. Tension. I stood up and picked up my briefcase. Before leaving, I put a hand on his shoulder. I'm not an investigator anymore, but I'm still compiling a file on this, and it will be thorough. Stephen said nothing. I walked out the door. Back home, I took off my coat, removed the memory cards, and archived the recording. The clip of Stephen saying, "We filed some paperwork, just for convenience." I labeled it preliminary confession, partial admission of responsibility. I opened the Case Blake Family folder and created a subfolder, Phase 2. Confirmation of fraudulent intent, audio. I hadn't sent it to anyone. I hadn't said a word. But I had the entire scene documented. I scheduled a meeting with Walter Beckett, an old lawyer I'd worked with during my time on the National Transportation Safety Board. We once argued for 3 days over a single sentence what constitutes a mechanical failure versus a human error. Walter won that debate. And now I needed him. We met in his small office on the second floor of a red brick building on a quiet corner. Walter hadn't changed silver hair, a short beard, and eyes that could never be fooled by a phony handshake. "It's been a while, Ed," he said, pouring me a glass of water. "Not a train wreck this time." I hope I shook my head. No. This wreck happened at home. And the victim is the one who won't speak up. I handed him the bank statements, the printout of the forged signature, and a drive with the audio recordings. Walter read in silence. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Can I be blunt? Please. Your son is walking a tightrope without a net. With what you have here, if you go public, he's facing a civil investigation for financial fraud, at the very least." I nodded. I don't want to sue. I just want to transfer everything assets, control my will, to the right person. And who is the right person? I opened my wallet and took out a folded piece of paper. On it was a single name, Emily Blake. Walter nodded. "Your granddaughter, I never saw her laugh when they humiliated me. I never saw her turn her back. And when I speak, she looks me in the eye, something her father hasn't been able to do for 3 years. Walter asked, "How much are you planning to leave her?" "Everything." "Do you want to explicitly disinherit the others?" I nodded. "Yes, but without fanfare. Just write in a clear condition anyone who contests the will is permanently barred from the inheritance. No need to name them. Walter gave a faint smile. A silent flick of the switch. I added, I also want to move the assets into an irrevocable trust in the designated beneficiary's name, with a clause that it cannot be altered as long as the grantor is alive and of sound mind. Walter took notes. You'll need a competency evaluation from an independent doctor. I've already scheduled it. Next Tuesday. Walter nodded. Good. Anything else? I pulled out a USB drive. This contains all the recordings, the signature analysis, and the transaction records. I don't need to sue, but if anyone tries to rewrite history later, I want the file to be as airtight as a technical report. Walter took it. You still work like you're on the board, Ed. Everything in layers, piece by piece. I looked him straight in the eye. When people dismiss an old man, they think his eyes have dimmed. His mind has dulled, and he's lost the one thing that matters most. And what's that? Walter asked. I replied, a systematic memory. We signed the first set of documents. Walking out of his office, I didn't feel relief. I felt armed. And if there's one thing I learned from decades of investigating accidents, it's this: sometimes all it takes is one sober person in a crowd of polite liars to prevent a total collapse. 3 days after meeting with Walter, I signed all the necessary documents. My estate was divided into 3 parts. 1. 70% transferred into an irrevocable trust in Emily Blake's name, to be activated only upon my death or my voluntary relinquishment of ownership, with one unchangeable condition: no one could act as my legal representative but me. 2. 20% donated to the National Center for Engineering Archives, where I had dedicated nearly half my life. 3. 10% to establish the Blake Engineering Ethics Fund, a scholarship for transportation safety investigators. Stephen and Danica. Not a single line. Their names weren't crossed out. They simply didn't exist. Walter added the no contest clause. Anyone who filed a lawsuit or challenged the legitimacy of this will would be permanently excluded from any financial benefit, present or future. I held the original copy, reading every line, not missing a single period. The last time I'd been this meticulous was with the final report on the Wisconsin bridge collapse, 48 pages, every number precise. The press had called me the cold mind of American engineering. Now I didn't need a title. I just needed one last piece of evidence to defend myself. That afternoon, I stopped by an old coffee shop near the train station. The owner was Kara, a woman in her late 50s, who had been a paralegal for many years. We'd met at a technical conference long ago. Now we only saw each other when she was brewing coffee. "Edmund," she said as I walked in. "You all right?" "I'm fine. But I could use a trusted ear." Kara nodded. "Go ahead." I gave her the short version, no deep details, just about the forged signature, the compromised account, the averted gazes in my own family. After listening, she set down my coffee. "Someone in the industry was asking about you recently. A guy from the city notary's office. Said a couple named Blake was inquiring about the process for obtaining guardianship." I was silent. That old feeling returned, the one you get when you're standing on a bridge and see a crack begin to spiderweb down a support pillar. "Did they give a reason?" I asked. Not specifically, but the way they were asking. It sounded like they wanted to declare that my father is no longer competent. I nodded. I once wrote the report confirming that the chief engineer of the Northern Line was no longer fit for duty after an accident. The file was 82 pages long, and I knew the fastest way to strip an old person of their rights is to paint the word senile on their forehead. That night I went home, opened my laptop, and wrote a short email to Walter. "They've started. We need to accelerate the competency evaluation. I want the neurological and civil capacity certificates as soon as possible." After sending it, I made some tea and sat looking at an old map on my wall. A map of the 1982 railway system, where I had surveyed every slope, every curved track. I remembered something my old colleague Silas used to say. The rails don't have to be straight to be safe, as long as they aren't being controlled by people who want to bend the truth. I pulled a small notebook from a drawer and wrote on the first page, Response Protocol 1. Maintain silence. Do not confront prematurely. 2. Obtain legal confirmation of cognitive capacity. 3. Prepare counter-filing in case of guardianship petition. 4. Record all future interactions. I underlined the last line, I am not retreating. I am inspecting the system before closing the station. Wednesday afternoon was overcast, no rain, but no sun either. I was making tea when the doorbell rang. I opened it. Standing before me were Stephen Danica and a stranger in a dark suit carrying a leather briefcase. Stephen spoke quickly, as if afraid I'd shut the door. Dad, this is our attorney, Mr. Miles Griffin. We just wanted to discuss a few things. May we come in? I held the door open. I didn't ask why. I led them into the living room. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't surprised. This was just confirmation, exactly as I had predicted. Danica poured water as if she were in her own home. The lawyer Miles opened his briefcase. Mr. Blake. He began, his voice as smooth as a form letter. Your family has some concerns about your mental well-being. Not that you aren't lucid, but certain recent behaviors, like altering your estate documents, refusing financial cooperation, can be signs of age-related stress. I sat still. Therefore, he continued, they would like to propose a partial guardianship agreement. It means you would continue to live independently, but all financial decisions would be managed by a representative. Stephen cut in his voice low. Don't get the wrong idea, Dad. We're doing this because we're worried about you. It's just a precaution. I said nothing. I just took a USB drive from a drawer and plugged it into my laptop. I opened the folder, Phase 2. Audio. I double-clicked on the file, Stephen. Self-admission. Falsified authorization.mp3. The living room fell silent. Then a voice filled the space, clear as day. Back in January, we filed some paperwork to simplify your retirement accounts. We didn't touch the money. It was just for convenience. We really didn't mean any harm. Stephen's face went pale. Danica turned to her husband in disbelief. I stopped the file. I removed the USB drive and placed it on the table. I once investigated a crash in Montana that happened because an engineer made a mistake and didn't report it. If he had just noted it in the logbook, 38 people would still be alive. I looked directly at Miles Griffin. I have recorded everything. I have authenticated the forged signature. And I have drafted a will with a clause stating that anyone who challenges my legal right to self-determination will be permanently disinherited. Danica stammered, You're threatening. I cut her off. I am not threatening you. I am informing you. My side of the story is the truth. What you do with your side is up to this lawyer to decide. Miles Griffin was silent. He picked up his briefcase. I think we should withdraw and reassess the situation. Stephen still hadn't said a word. His lips were pressed into a thin line. The confident man of the house persona was gone. All that was left was a man who had been caught. I didn't see them out. I didn't ask if they had anything else to say. When the door closed, I did only one thing. I opened my laptop and made a note in my digital journal, date Chung. They attempted a confrontation. I was not angry. I was not flustered. I was recording. And this time the silence is no longer mine. That night, after Stephen Danica and their lawyer had retreated, I brewed a pot of black tea, turned on my desk lamp, and began to wrap things up. I opened my laptop. Every audio file, every scanned forgery, every bank statement and certificate of competency. I gathered them all into a single compressed folder. The folder's name was Blake Case. Truth Archive. I copied it to a new USB drive, sealed it in a small velvet pouch, and attached a handwritten label for the only one who didn't look away when they tried to humiliate me. I printed a short letter, no more than 1 page, handwritten in black ink. Emily, if you are receiving this, it means I have left. There is no tragedy here, no tears, just a man who decided he would not wait around for another betrayal. You don't need to do anything with the evidence in this pouch. But if one day someone asks questions or tries to reconstruct the truth to fit their narrative, open it. Everything inside is accurate, like a rail map calibrated to the millimeter. You used to look at me not as an old man, but as a man who still had value. That alone was enough for me to believe that the life I lived did not fade into meaninglessness. If you ever need to find me, remember the little wooden bridge by the lake in Vermont. I told you about it when you were a little girl. The bridge is still there, and I am never further than the understanding in someone's eyes. With love, Grandpa. The next morning, I withdrew enough cash to last 6 months, closed my old accounts, and transferred the lease on my house to the trust. I didn't take much: a suitcase of clothes, a few old engineering notebooks, and the pocket watch that had stopped running in 2011, the year I retired. I never had it fixed. I didn't need the current time. I needed the memory to remain intact. I caught an early bus out of the city heading north. I chose a small town by a lake, a place where no one asked, "Who are you?" but only need anything else. That evening, I sat on the porch of a small wooden rental, watching the water as still as a blank page no one had written on yet. In my pocket was a small slip of paper with a single line written on it. I didn't win. I didn't lose. I just stopped being silent. I lived in a small cabin in Vermont, on the edge of a forest overlooking the lake. No social media. No smartphone. Just an old radio, 2 shelves of books, and a desk big enough for writing letters by hand. I didn't count the days, but I had a wall calendar, and each month I marked one day in red ink, "Send letter to Emily." I didn't expect a reply. I just wanted her to know that someone somewhere still saw her with kind eyes, and would never speak of the past with resentment. The first letter I wrote Emily: "It's windy today. I was fixing the south fence and thought of you. No particular reason. I just saw someone walk past the gate, slow and deliberate, the way you used to enter my room, never rushing, but never looking away. You don't need to write back. I just need you to know I can still write. And I still remember who helped me stand tall among all the polite lies. Grandpa." 3 months passed. No letters in return. But I wasn't disappointed. I once spent a year examining a single fractured bridge support just because of a gut feeling that something was off. Waiting didn't bother me. Not as long as I knew I was waiting for something real. Then one early autumn afternoon, as I was mowing the small patch of grass in my yard, I saw a figure standing by the white fence. Brown hair, tall, a thin jacket, hands in her pockets. She didn't knock. She didn't wave. She just stood there looking in. I didn't go to greet her. I just put a hand on my chest, as if to confirm my heart was still beating calmly. It was Emily. She said nothing. She just looked at me. I nodded. She nodded back. No smile. No tears. But her eyes said everything I needed to hear. I know. I saw it all. She stood there for a few minutes. Then she turned and walked away, slowly without looking back. I didn't call out to her, because I didn't need to. That night I sat by the window and wrote the final entry in my journal. I lived my life as an engineer, then as a father. Then I was pushed off the very blueprint I had drawn. But now I understand sometimes the most important thing isn't being acknowledged. It's refusing to let yourself disappear into the silence. I am Edmund Blake, and I was never a burden. People think old men are harmless, that we're too slow to notice, too tired to fight back. But the truth is, we've just learned to strike once and strike right. If your own son forged your signature, would you walk away quietly, or would you make sure he never forgets it?